Kyoko M. is the author of the Black Parade urban fantasy paranormal romance series and the Of Cinder and Bone science fiction series. She is also a contributor to Marvel Comics' Black Panther, Tales of Wakanda anthology. Kyoko, it's yours.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am so excited to read Of Claws and Inferno for you guys. This is the 5th book in the Of Cinder and Bone series. It actually came out on April 24th, 2022, and I will be doing a reading of that. I'm going to set my little timer here, and hopefully everybody enjoys it. I'm getting too old for this shit. Jack shut the door to the rental van and then walked around to the rear, keys jingling in his hands. He popped open the doors and smiled at the dragon inside as she yawned and stood up. Ready to work, girl? Pete shook herself as he climbed inside and unlocked her cage. She stepped out into the Georgia sun and onto the parking lot of the Brookhaven Country Club, which had been cleared out ahead of their arrival. Luckily, they'd managed to get a good day with no rain. The only other vehicle in the lot was the news van that had been following him since he landed at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport not too long ago. He envied Libby. She'd only had one cameraman to put up with, but he'd been assigned to a small team. The reason Bellwether had been that the scavenger dragon was notoriously hard to catch on film. There were only small snippets available, and while by now the witnesses could describe it, no one had ever caught more than a minute's worth of footage due to its mostly nocturnal behavior and its liquid-fast movements. Even the nighttime security cameras at the malls where it had stolen jewelry hadn't gotten clear looks at the dragon. That being said, Jack didn't trust Bellwether's word. He had a hunch that they wanted heavier coverage with him being popular among the dragon hunters. He hadn't turned the footage on yet, but he suspected the same amount of attention would be given to Beowulf. They were capitalizing on them to drive up ratings and whatever profit could be drained from the airing of the tournament. It annoyed him deeply, given that he wanted to do the right thing for the dragons, not become an entertainer. "All right, girlie," Jack said, reaching into one of the dividers in the back of the van and pulling out a sealed plastic baggie. Inside was a patch of skin shed by the scavenger dragon that someone had found on the golf course behind them. He'd met with the Department of Natural Resources after he landed, and they gave him the skin as well as the data they'd been able to collect so far. He opened the baggie and held the skin out to the dragon. "Let's see what you can find." Pete stooped her head and sniffed the dragon skin. She did so for about 10 seconds and then turned away from him, her nostrils flaring. She spared a glance at the camera crew a few spaces down, which made them freeze in place, and Jack chuckled under his breath before moving forward towards the greenway. Jack shut the van doors and locked it, then called out to the crew. "Relax, she's on the case. Just make sure you give her a wide berth, maybe 3 or 4 yards. She's not aggressive, but she doesn't like strangers." They gave him a thumbs up, and he trailed after Pete, tucking the skin sample into his belt just in case she needed a refresher. He'd had to make a choice for what to bring with him, the net launcher or Libby's new tranquilizer rifle. He'd gone for the rifle. Based on what little footage there was, he'd never be able to catch the scavenger dragon in a net. It had reflexes like a feral cat, from what he'd seen, and he lived on a farm long enough to know you couldn't catch a feral cat very easily. The scavenger dragon had been spotted here multiple times, either sunbathing or drinking water and catching a few fish in a small lake. The golf course was less than 2 miles from Phipps Plaza and Lenox Mall. The dragon would want somewhere quiet, away from the noise of Atlanta, and away from people, to stash its treasures. The golf course was strictly maintained, so that was why the landscapers caught on immediately to the strangely large mounds dug into the ground on the outer edges of the fairway. However, Jack didn't suspect the dragon's den would be here. It probably had decided to make this its hunting ground. The scavenger dragon fed primarily on woodland creatures and the occasional freshwater fish, and this area would have plenty of both. It could burrow on and off the grounds with relative ease, especially at night when no one would be on the course. Flying would take even less time, and he was pretty sure it would be around today. Pete led him into a sand trap and found her first clue that the dragon had been there recently, droppings. Jack knelt and scanned the feces into his forearm device for later analysis, wrinkling his nose at the stench. "Well, it's definitely on the premises because that's one horrifically fresh turd. Thanks for that." Pete snorted at him. Jack knew what that meant. "Yes, you have a point. It does smell far worse to you than it does to me. Still, though, dragon poop is one of the worst parts of this job." She flung sand in his general direction, and he chuckled again. All right, I'll shut up and let you concentrate. After she inspected the sand trap thoroughly, Pete climbed out, shaking off the sand, and continued across the golf course to the wooded area on the outskirts. There were various patches of trees throughout the land, nothing dense like a forest, but enough to shade one comfortably in certain spots. She walked for a few yards and then stopped when she reached a winding path that went past another patch of trees. Pete sat and folded her wings, staring ahead steadily without moving. Jack knew what that meant, too. Pay dirt. He took his binoculars off his belt and looked through them. The stretch of trees were roughly 10 yards away. They were downwind, which worked to their benefit since he spotted the scavenger dragon in the thicket. Unlike the dark-backed worm, the scavenger dragon hadn't gotten any larger. It was still about the size of a Labrador or a golden retriever. The sunlight didn't glint off of its dull brown scales. It blended in amazingly well with the dirt and loam beneath it, making it harder to see from a distance. It was currently pulling off furry chunks of a wild rabbit carcass. Gray fur scattered through the air and settled around it like a carpet of morbid cotton balls. All right, this way, girl, Jack murmured, patting her side. They were on level ground with it, so they needed to take cover before it spotted them. Pete's green scales would blend into the grass, but certainly not Jack's gray suit, so they slipped into another thicket nearby. Jack motioned for the camera crew to back up, and they retreated into a nearby sand trap to stay out of sight. Jack touched the control panel on his helmet to hail Shannon. I've got eyes on our scaly little thief. Roger that. Do you have a clear shot? Jack admitted. It's decent, but not ideal. I'll do my best. Cross your crusty old fingers for me. I'll be sure to do that, Shannon said dryly. Jack slid the tranquilizer rifle around to his hands and set up the tripod to hold it steady. He prepped it the way Libby had shown him and flattened to the ground, taking careful aim. He settled in and let his heart beat slow, then his breathing, concentrating the crosshairs on the dragon's lighter scales on his underbelly. On most species, the belly scales were thinner and could be penetrated more easily by a syringe, but not always. He'd have one shot and one shot only from here. Jack moved his finger over the trigger. He took a deep breath and then let it out slowly. Then he pulled the trigger. And right before he did, one of the camera crew members sneezed. Achoo! The scavenger dragon pushed up on all fours, its head snapping around in the direction of the sand trap. Jack's shot missed, flying underneath it and hitting the tree trunk behind it. The scavenger dragon hissed and spread its dark wings, taking off into the air. God damn it! Jack collapsed the rifle's tripod and slung the weapon around his back before leaping onto Pete's saddle. Let's go! Pete got a running start and took off into the sky after the fleeing scavenger dragon. The brown dragon screeched once it spotted them behind it and flew northwest of the golf course. And speed was the name of the game. The scavenger dragon's wings parted the air, and it took only seconds for Jack to know they wouldn't be able to keep up. Pete was a heavy dragon, even with her streamlined body, and he was a full-grown man. Their combined weight would hold them back, and it only had to contend with being 60 or so pounds. He had to catch it alive, which meant blinding it would cause it to fall to its death. He didn't have the net launcher with him, and at this altitude, the rifle wouldn't make the shot. They were going to lose it, even if only temporarily. The scavenger dragon dove sharply towards the ground. Jack used his helmet's heads-up display and focused to see where it headed. He spotted a large drainage pipe to the right of a street and cursed under his breath. Seconds later, the scavenger dragon spread its wings out to glide and then pulled them into its side, allowing it to fit perfectly inside. Jack and Pete landed a moment later, but with Pete's size, it would be impossible to follow it. He flipped on his flashlight and checked the drainage pipe. It was the kind that was built into a hill, and the creature could get around easily without being seen. Jack groaned and leaned against Pete's side. Back to square one.